Welcome back, friends. I'm Annabelle, and I'm here to read. If you would like to follow along, I put a copy of the ebook down in the video description box, or you can enable captions. And down in the video description box as well are any content warnings, because we're all just here to have a good time and listen to a fun story, and sometimes there are things that get in the way of that. This is the first upload of the new year, so we're going to celebrate Public Domain Day, and we'll have a little bit more about that in the Ramble part of the video after we read the story. This week's story is Freedom by Nella Larsen. He wondered, as he walked deftly through the impassioned traffic on the avenue, how she would adjust her life if he were to withdraw from it. How peaceful it would be to have no woman in one's life. These months away took on the appearance of a liberation, a temporary recess from a hateful existence in which he lived in intimacy with someone he did not know and would not now have chosen. He began, again, to speculate on the pattern her life would take without him. Abruptly, it flashed upon him that the vague irritation of many weeks was a feeling of smoldering resentment against her. The displeasure that this realization caused him increased his ill humor and distaste. He began to dissect her with an acrimony that astonished himself. Her unanimated beauty seemed now only a thin disguise for an inert mind, and not for the sincere beauty of soul which he had attributed to her. He suspected, too, a touch of depravity, perhaps only physical, but more likely mental as well. Reflection convinced him that her appeal for him was bounded by the senses, for witness his disgust and clarity of vision now that they were separated. How could he have been so blinded? Why, for him she had been the universe, a universe personal and unheedful of outside persons or things. He had adored her in a slavish fashion. He groaned inwardly at his own mental caricature of himself, sitting dumb, staring at her in fatuous worship. What an ass he had been. His work here was done, but what was there to prevent him from staying away for 6 months, a year, forever, never to see her again? He stopped, irresolute. What would she do? He tried to construct a representation of her future without him. In his present new hatred, she became a creature irresistibly given to pleasure at no matter what cost. A sybarite, a parasite, too. He was prayerfully thankful that appreciation of his danger had come before she had sapped him from all physical and spiritual vitality. But her future troubled him even while he assured himself that he knew its road, and laughed ruefully at the picture of her flitting from mate to mate. A feverish impatience gripped him. Somehow he must contrive to get himself out of the slough into which his amorous folly had precipitated him. 3 years! Good God! At the moment, those 3 years seemed the most precious of his life, and he had foolishly thrown them away. He had drifted pleasantly, peacefully, without landmarks, would be drifting yet but for the death of a friend whose final affairs had brought him away. He started. Death. Perhaps she would die. How that would simplify matters for him, but no, she would not die. He laughed without amusement. She would not die. She would outlast him, damn her. An angry resentment, sharp and painful as a whiplash, struck him. Its passing left him calm and determined. He braced himself and continued to walk. He had decided he would stay. With this decision, he seemed to be reborn. He felt cool, refreshed, as if he had stepped out from a warm, scented place into a cold, brisk breeze. He was happy. The world had turned to silver and gold, and life again became a magical adventure. Even the placards in the shops shone with the light of paradise upon them. One caught and held his eye. Travel. Yes, he would travel. Lose himself in India, China, the South Seas. Radiance from the most battered vehicle and the meanest pedestrian. Gladness flooded him. He was free. A year, thick with wondrous adventures, had slid by since that spring day on which he had wrenched himself free. He had lived, been happy, and with no woman in his life. The break had been simple, a telegram hinting at prolonged business and indefinite return. There had been no reply. This had annoyed him, but he had told himself it was what he had expected. He would not admit that, perhaps, he had missed her letter in his wanderings. He had persuaded himself to believe what he wanted to believe, that she had not cared. Actually, there had been confusion in his mind, a complex of thoughts which had made it difficult to know which he really had thought. He had imagined that he shuddered at the idea that she had accepted the most generous offer. He pitied her. There was, too, a touch of sadness, a sense of something lost, which he irritably explained on the score of her beauty. Beauty of any kind always stirred him. Too bad a woman like that couldn't be decent. He was well rid of her. But what had she done? How had he taken it? His contemptuous mood visualized her at times, laughing merrily at some jest made by his successor, or again sitting silent, staring into the fire. He would be conscious of every detail of her appearance, her hair simply arranged, her soft, dark eyes, her delicate chin propped on hands rivaling the emotions which had ensnared him when he ached with yearning, when he longed for her again. Such moments were rare. Another year passed, during which his life had widened, risen, and then crashed. Dead? How could she be dead? Dead in childbirth, they had told him, both his mistress and the child she had borne him. She had been dead on that spring day when, resentful and angry at her influence in his life, he had reached out toward freedom, to find only a mirage, for he saw quite plainly that now he would never be free. It was she who had escaped him. Each time he had cursed and wondered, it had been a dead woman whom he had cursed and about whom he had wondered. He shivered. He seemed always to be cold now. Well rid of her! How well he had not known, nor how easily. She was dead, and he had cursed her. But one didn't curse the dead. Didn't one? Damn her! Why couldn't she have lived, or why hadn't she died sooner? For long months he had wondered how she had arranged her life, and all the while she had done nothing but to complete it by dying. The futility of all his speculations exasperated him. His old resentment returned. She had spoiled his life, first by living and then by dying. He hated the fact that she had finished with him rather than he with her. He could not forgive her. Forgive her? She was dead. He felt somehow that, after all, the dead did not care if you forgave them or not. Gradually, his mind became a puppet to a disturbing tension which drove it back and forth between two thoughts. He had left her. She was dead. These two facts became lodged in his mind like burrs prickling at his breaking faculties. As he recalled the manner of his leaving her, it seemed increasingly brutal. She had died loving him, bearing him a child, and he had left her. He tried to shake off the heavy mental dejection which weighed him down, but his former will and determination deserted him. The vitality of the past, forever dragging him down into black depression, frightened him. The mental fog, thick as soot, into which the news of her death had trapped him, appalled him. He must get himself out. A wild anger seized him. He began to think of his own death, self-inflicted, with feeling that defied analysis. His zest for life became swallowed up in the rising tide of sorrow and mental chaos which was engulfing him. As autumn approached, with faint notice on his part, his anger and resentment retreated, leaving in their wake a gentle stir of regret and remorse. Imperceptibly, he grew physically weary. A strange sensation of loneliness and isolation enveloped him. A species of timidity came upon him. He felt an unhappy remoteness from people and began to edge away from life. His deepening sense of isolation drove him more and more back upon his memories. Sunk in his armchair before the fire, He passed the days and sometimes the nights. For some, he had lost count of those, merged as they were into one another. His increasing mental haziness had rejected the fact of her death. Often she was there with him, just beyond the firelight or the candlelight. She talked and laughed with him. Sometimes at night he woke to see her standing over him or sitting in his chair before the dying fire. By some mysterious process, the glory of first love flamed again in him. He forgot that they had ever parted. His twisted memories visioned her with him in places where she had never been. He had forgotten all but the past, and that was brightly distorted. He sat, waiting for her. He seemed to remember that she had promised to come. Outside, the street was quiet. She was late. Why didn't she come? Childish tears fell over his cold cheeks. He sat, weeping in front of the sinking fire. A nameless dread seized him. She would not come. In the agony of his disappointment, he did not see that the fire had died and the candles had sputtered out. He sat wrapped in immeasurable sadness. He knew that she would not come. Something in this thought fired his disintegrating brain. She would not come, then he must go to her. He rose, shaking with cold, and groped toward the door. Yes, he would go to her. The gleam of his street light through a French window caught his attention. He stumbled toward it. His cold fingers fumbled a moment with a catch, but he tore it open with a spark of his old determination and power and stepped out and down to the pavement 100 feet below. The end. Eventually, I will probably, I hope, get to doing a whole video about the public domain and all that kind of stuff and how it applies to this channel. But in terms of literature, basically on January 1st, a whole bunch of works from the past are now just kind of fair game to do with whatever the heck you want. As an example, when The Great Gatsby rolled over into public domain last year, somebody uploaded the entire text of The Great Gatsby to Archive of Our Own, except they added one single paragraph where Tom and Gatsby kiss. And that's it. That's the only change that they made. That's the power of the public domain. In terms of this channel, that means that we can create an audiobook without worrying about being sued by the rights holder. So, yay for us. The rollover happens on January the 1st, so this is the first upload of the new year. So, we'll celebrate now, even though it's not actually January 1st. But the laws for the United States and the laws for Europe are slightly different. In the United States, it is all of the works published on or before a certain year. So this year, all the works from 1926, like Freedom, initially published in 1926, are now officially in the public domain. But in Europe, it goes off the date of the death of the author or writer, singer, creator, whatever. So in most of the EU this year, rolling over are works by people who died in 1951 or before that. But in the United States, this means that Dorothy Parker's Enough Rope, Hemingway's The Sun Also Rises, and A.A. Milne, specifically A.A. Milne's version of Winnie the Pooh. Do not try to do like Winnie the Pooh with a red shirt on, because Disney will come after you, and we don't want to mess with Disney. So yay, more works to add to the literal thousands of thousands that we already had at our disposal before 1926, but, you know, who's counting? Freedom by Nella Larsen was first published in Young's magazine in April of 1926, which means that it is now in the public domain as of 2022, yeah! Nella Larsen's work at the time was very revolutionary. She talked a lot about race in her work, specifically Quicksand and Passing, her two big novels. Passing actually was just adapted, I think it was by Netflix. It starred Ruth Negga, Tessa Thompson, and Alexander Skarsgård. But that book, I mean, you can tell from the title, Passing, is very, very much about race.
You dislike Negroes, Mr. Bellew?
No, not at all. I hate them.
But beyond race, it also has these kind of women with a secret sort of like sub-theme plot genre thing, and that seems to be where Nella Larsen really shines, is with these women who have these like low-down little, I want to say twist, but it's not like the M. Night Shyamalan, like, and then they were all aliens from out, like, it's not that kind of twist. It's just this internal knowledge. It boils down a lot along the lines of, like, dramatic irony, where something has happened, but one or more of the characters are kind of still in the dark about that thing that happened, and that kind of theme is very much in the forefront in Freedom. Even though I don't think it's a stretch to say that we are not rooting for this protagonist, at the same time, I think that it's kind of interesting to think of what we might do in a situation. Not that we would ever, ghost our pregnant mistress or whatever, but that kind of idea of, like, I don't really want to interact with you because this is, I feel like this is a toxic relationship, let's not interact anymore. And then the other person has ghosted us well in advance. Like that kind of thing. Maybe I need to hang out with better people. Even though we are clearly not rooting for this protagonist, I mean, I hope you're not rooting for this protagonist. That idea of losing something that you had already lost. He could never have reclaimed her at that point. It had been 2 years since he had ghosted her. So there was no way, no matter what, there's no way that he could have regained her good graces or whatever have you. And I think that it's interesting what she does with all of the traits of this woman, how she goes down, how she has the protagonist go down and say, well, she's beautiful, but her beauty was just masking what an idiot she was, I feel like that's something that a lot of people do when they are trying to distance themselves from a situation. I mean, obviously his jumping to the pavement means that she meant a little bit more to him than he was kind of letting on. So let me know how you liked this one down in the video description box. I feel like I don't really like what happens at all, but I feel like it's still an interesting idea. I don't like the sequence of events, but I like the writing, if that makes sense. So let me know what you think down in the comments, and while you're there, you might as well subscribe, because we're here every week with more classic literature. I'll see y'all next time.